The deadliest all-female army you've never heard of. If you have watched the 2018 Marvel's film called Black Panther, then you must have noticed the proud and fierce female warriors, handy with a lethal spear and, unlike most armies, comprised entirely of women known as the Dora Milaje, meaning the adored ones. These women are entrusted as the gatekeepers of their country, which has famously never been colonized according to the Special Forces units of the fictional kingdom of Wakanda. The Dora Milaje may sound like a fable or an imaginary group concocted by comic writers, but they actually resemble a sub-Saharan band of female warriors who left the European colonizers shaking in their boots. Foreign observers call them the Dahomey Amazons, while they call themselves Mino, which means our mothers. The Dahomey warriors have one mission: protecting their king and community with their lives. The Dahomey warriors fought on the bloodiest of battlefields and emerged as an elite fighting force in the kingdom of Dahomey, in the present-day Republic of Benin. These women were described as untouchable and were sworn in as virgins. To put this into perspective, swift decapitation was their trademark. The first Amazon was Tasi Hangbe, daughter of King Hagweg Baja, founder of the Dahomey Kingdom and a twin sister to King Akaba. In 1708, after the king's demise following a long illness, she was silently installed as the head of the military. It was only after returning from her military campaigns that she was publicly proclaimed Queen of Dahomey. Despite reigning for just 3 years, Tansi Hangbe had enough time to draw attention to women. She decided that they should go hunting and take care of farming, both activities previously reserved for men. She also developed agriculture and facilitated the supply of free drinking water to all of her subjects. From daughters to soldiers, and from wives to weapons, they remain the only documented frontline female troops in modern warfare history. How the Dahomey Amazons were formed. The exact period when the army was formed is quite unknown, although some historians attribute it to the 18th century, when French slaver Jean-Pierre Thibault described seeing groups of third-rank Ahosi wives armed with long poles and acting as police. In any case, the warriors are said to have been originally started by the king of Dahomey, King Hagweg Baja, who ruled from 1645 to 1685. These Amazon warriors are said to have been initially made up of hunters known as Gbeto. They were later comprised of the Ahosi and slaves from conquest or neighboring villages and tribes. By the time of King Hagweg Baja's sons, King Agaja, who reigned from 1708 to 1732, the Dahomey Amazons were established as bodyguards armed with muskets and were used as militia to defeat neighboring kingdoms. Later, King Gezo, who ruled from 1818 to 1858, initiated this even further, placing great importance on the army by increasing its budget and formalizing its structure from ceremonial to a serious military entity. He did this by recruiting soldiers from foreign captives, although some were free Dahomeyan women. It is important to note that a number of the Amazon warriors became soldiers voluntarily, while others were involuntarily enrolled due to their husbands or fathers reporting about their behavior. Life as a Dahomey warrior. Growing up as a young girl in the kingdom of Dahomey was a bitter-sweet experience. The non-Meton, as they were also called, were not allowed to marry nor have children while serving as soldiers, and were considered married to the king in a vow of chastity, focused solely on their semi-secret status as elite warriors. Not even the king dared to break their celibacy vows, and if you were not the king, to even touch these women meant death, although a chosen few were married off to respected dignitaries of the kingdom. These women enjoyed certain privileges, such as a good stock of tobacco and drinks, as well as the ability to stay in the king's palace after dark, which the males were not permitted to do. They also had as many as 50 slaves per soldier to help them run their other activities while they protect their king and community. Accounts also stated that when leaving the palace to the outside community, the soldiers usually had a slave in front of them, ringing a small bell which was to alert people of the Amazons approaching and for them to give way, bow, and avert their eyes as they approached. The Amazons were celebrated in the region and successfully enabled the expansion of the Dahomey Empire beyond its capital Dahomey. They trained intensely, often in hand-to-hand combat amongst themselves. Discipline was very much emphasized as they learned survival skills. Their indifference to pain and death was tested as part of the initiation process, storming acacia thorn defenses in militia drills, including executing prisoners. They were armed in Dutch muskets and machetes, and by the early 19th century, They had become increasingly militaristic and fiercely devoted to their king. Girls were recruited and given weapons as young as 8 years old, and while some women in the society became soldiers voluntarily, others were also enrolled by husbands who complained of unruly wives they couldn't control. From the start, they were trained to be strong, fast, ruthless, and able to withstand great pain. Exercises that resembled a form of gymnastics included jumping over walls covered with thorny acacia branches, sent on long 10-day Hunger Games-style expeditions in the jungle without supplies, only their machetes becoming fanatical about battle. To prove themselves, they had to be twice as tough as the men. Often seen as the last woman standing in battle, unless expressly ordered to retreat by their king, the Dahomey women fought to death as defeat was never an option. So being part of this clan was honor and pride to these women because they were a symbol of hope to the people of Dahomey. Their combatant structure. The Dahomey kingdom was often at war with its neighbors, and captives were needed for slave trade, making the Dahomey warriors to fight fiercely, to capture slaves, and also to defeat their enemies and protect their king. The women soldiers were rigorously trained and given uniforms, and by the mid-19th century, they numbered between 1,000 and 6,000 women, about a third of the entire Dahomey army. Their fierce training turned them into more efficient warriors than men. During warfare, they were merciless and cruel, to the point that they would behead anybody who resisted them. They had 3 main wings, the right and left wings, and the allied center wing or fanti. Each of these wings had 5 subgroups: the artillery women, the elephant huntresses, the musket-bearing frontline group, the razor women, and the archers. Each regiment had different uniforms, weapons, and commanders. They served in battles in conjunction with male troops. The women soldiers were said to be structured in parallel with the army as a whole, with a center wing flanked on both sides, each under separate commanders. And in the mid-19th century accounts by an English observer, it was documented that the women that had 3 stripes of whitewash around each leg were honored with marks of distinction. In the latter period, the Dahomey female warriors were armed with Winchester rifles, clubs, and knives. The units were under female command. An 1851 published translation of a war chant of the women claims the warriors would chant, "The blacksmith takes an iron bar, and the fire changes its fashion, so we changed our nature. We are no longer women, we are men." How did the Dahomey Amazons distinguish themselves? The women soldiers of Dahomey distinguished themselves in the history of Africa as a symbol of courage because no matter how hard the battles became, they never withdrew, while male soldiers were often punished for retreating. King Behanzin, the last great king of this monarchy, relied on their unfailing devotion to resist the French colonial conquest. A very large number of women soldiers gave their lives for that cause. Fearless warriors, win or die, was their motto. Having taken a vow of chastity by joining the Dahomey army, these allied warriors, who were not allowed to marry or have children while in service, possessed an almost sacred status that condemned most men daring to lay a hand on them to death. Heads shaved and wearing a white cap adorned with blue caimans, they had a manly feature and black eyes. These were formidable warriors who decapitated their adversaries and brandished their heads to crush all resistance. The Amazons underwent intense training in combat and weapon handling. They were psychologically conditioned to resist pain and ignore pity. At the end of the 19th century, 4,000 warriors could be mobilized in the event of a conflict. They were divided into different units, each with its own uniforms, flags, songs, and combat dances. These formidable warriors surpassed men by their courage and their effectiveness in combat. The end and legacy of the Dahomey. In 1882, the King Behanzin, who wanted to protect his commercial rights, went to war against France. Faced with a better-equipped French army, the Amazons suffered tremendous losses, and King Behanzin, the last king of Dahomey, was overthrown in the Second Franco-Dahomeyan War. The Dahomey warriors were defeated and disbanded as a result, thus reflecting their motto, "If soldiers go to war, they should conquer or die." However, the last surviving Amazon of Dahomey died at the age of 100 in 1979, a woman named Nawi who was discovered living in a remote village. Despite committing what today would amount to war crimes, the Amazons are regarded as a symbol of female emancipation. After being ignored for years, they are now gradually being honored. In 2018, it was announced that the rights to a feature film called The Woman King had been acquired, inspired by Dahomey Amazons, starring Viola Davis and Lupita Nyong'o, and described the story of Nansika, general of the Amazons, and her daughter Nawi. Also in Abomey, A museum commemorating Tasi Hangwei is being built. Besides, she is celebrated by her descendants with festive ceremonies involving singing and dancing, giving the Dahomey Amazons legacy a name. The Dahomey warriors were great women, and they will be forever engraved in the minds of humanity and remembered throughout history. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, do well to give it a thumbs up, like the video, and also subscribe to the channel.